I grew up in Wales in a family that loved nature. After I met Dave Milsom and Jim Coey, I had an interest in nature and looking at birds. And so they had a company called Flora and Fauna Field Tours. They said to me, come and join us. Hudson Bay, my first trip to go to do goose banding and to do surveying as well. I was the OFO rep on the Ontario Shorebird Conservation Plan. I said to Ken, who is also on the committee, now how would I get, not knowing, how would I ever get up to Hudson Bay? How does one get up there? And he said, oh, you want to go? And I said, yes. He said, I'll take you. So we were banding geese. You make sure there's no polar bear within sight. The chopper pilot was outside the net, and our heads are all down because you're looking at what you're doing. All of a sudden, he said, holy shit, polar bear. Right behind him, was a bear. And he said, how did that bear get here? And nobody, we didn't see it. And the bear's just looking at us. Oh, this is really fun.
Dun, 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 dun. Yes, the Big Year podcast is back. I'm Robert Beaumander, your guide to the world of big ear birding. And yes, after a long, cold, snowy winter, the temperatures are finally on the rise and the birds are finally on migration. It won't be long before American tree sparrows are replaced by chipping sparrows and dark-eyed juncos take a junket to northern Canada and Alaska. Soon, northern shrikes will fly north and the warblers will return from the south. The swallows will return from the tropics and the snowy owls will depart for their breeding grounds in the high Arctic. Yeah, I could go on, but you get the idea. What's that? One more, you say? Okay, let's see, as I'm stretching the premise a bit here, but, okay. The black scoters will scoot away to northern Quebec, and the black terns will return from South America. There you go, I think I've exhausted the premise. Anywho, I hope you're all in the spring migration spirit and shedding those layers and putting on your fancy spring birding plumage. As for me, I just switched from fleece-lined cargo pants to regular cargo pants. And of course, my biggest plumage change is from a winter fur fedora to a straw summer fedora. I have some fun guests lined up this year, and being an Ontario birder myself, there's no better place to start than with one of Ontario's most respected birders, Jean Iron. Many of you have met Jean out at Niagara looking for gulls in the winter, at a hawk watch at Lynn Shores in the fall, or in May at Point Pelee National Park. You may have met her, but now you'll get a chance to know her. When I began birding, I did know of Jean Iron, as Sue had mentioned her, something about using a spice jar lid with her camera to digiscope birds. I first ran into Jean early in January of 2012 on one of my first rare bird chases, and she taught me a lesson that I have taken to heart ever since. And it was a lesson she also learned early in her birding career. So with my obligatory introduction out of the way, let's get on with the show, won't you? Good morning.
Yeah, how are you? Oh, look at you with the fancy poster in the background and all that.
That was my inspiration for the whole birding thing. Thinking about doing a big year was the single reason that got me into birding.
Oh.
For all the right reasons, it all worked out.
Good.
Sue was a birder for years before I even wanted to do it. She took me to the movie and I had no idea it was about birds, and that just got me hooked.
Oh, there you go.
We met for the first time on January 2012.
Oh my goodness.
I remember because Sue had mentioned your name before I even went out that day, but I didn't know who you were other than I heard the name, and it was a king eider, and I got there and I was 11 days into birding and I had no idea what I was doing or what I was looking for, and you kindly let me look through your scope to see the bird.
Okay.
And we've known each other ever since.
As long as I was nice to you.
Very nice. But I was so new to birding and I was trying to see as many birds as possible. So I looked through your scope, I saw it and said thank you. And I was about to walk away and you said, aren't you going to stay and study the bird? And that just changed my whole mindset about what I was doing.
Yeah. Oh, that's good.
And I've learned so much from you, but I haven't learned a lot about you.
Oh, well, there you go.
You have helped a lot of birders over the years, and you've probably helped a lot of birders during their big years, just to help them find birds, finding birds that they could go chase. How did you start in birding? You were a kid when you started? You weren't a 51-year-old like I was.
No, but I was getting up there. No, I grew up in Wales in a family that loved nature and the countryside. And our treat every weekend was to go for rambles or walks with my dad and his brother. And we walked all through the countryside, not far from our house. And that was it. And my uncle, I think he had a dog or something that we would take along with us. But that was how we got into nature. My mother worked, not while she was raising us, but pre that. She'd worked in the Newport Museum. They had all kinds of exhibits and everything. She still took us down there. And so we were into natural history. She was more of a botanist than a birder. But even as a child, we had bird feeders up and we would look for those winter birds coming down. But to get into it seriously was after I met Dave Milsom and Jim Coey. They were colleagues of mine in teaching. I first met Dave, I believe I was still a consultant in special education, and he had a special ed class in his school. But I had an interest in nature and looking at birds, and so they had a company called Flora and Fauna Field Tours. And anyway, they said to me, get going, come and join us, type of thing. Actually, the funny thing happened was I was at a meeting in Dave Milsom's school. So I was sitting in his office waiting for the meeting to start. And on his coffee table, there was a carved wooden sculpture. Maybe it was a bittern with the neck. You know how they stretch their neck up. And I said, oh, I had just been to Jamaica. This was totally pre-birding. And I had been to Jamaica with friends and stayed at one of those resort hotels. And you know how you've got a fence almost around these resort places. And then the locals would come and sell all their stuff. And so I had actually noticed and admired these beautiful wooden, smooth, lovely carvings of birds. When Dave came back in to start the meeting, I said, oh, Dave, I really like your carving. I was just on vacation in Jamaica and I saw them outside the hotel and they were selling them and they were really cheap. They were just $4 each. And he said, oh, yeah, 2 teachers on staff brought that back for me from Jamaica.
Oh, really?
Do you mean they only spent $4 on me? Anyway, I owe all my birding to joining up with them in the late 1980s. And then, of course, I met Ron. And so that consolidated everything. But they took me out every weekend. We were principals. And so you're working during the week. They took me to Point Pelee. They took me all over southern Ontario. And then our first trip was up to Churchill. Then from there, Costa Rica, Argentina. And so we're all still friends.
A lot of times people get into guiding well into their birding career. You got into birding because of guiding almost, it seems.
Well, actually, you're right. Before retirement, so probably for the last couple of years before I retired, Jim Coey was a good friend of Barry Griffiths, who ran Quest Nature Tours. And Jim Coey said to me, how would you like to do some Peely trips? I would go down with Barry and Jim and Dave, and we'd help the Friends of Point Pelee and do the guiding. So we didn't get paid by Quest, it was volunteer, so that the Friends of Point Pelee could save the money that they would have had to pay leaders.
Being a teacher and an educator and loving nature, that helped you become not just a birder, but an author and an expert, especially in shorebirds over the years. How did that?
I owe everything to Ron Pittaway because he's the person who said, now look at the bird and study the bird and think about it instead of just coming, oh, there it is, ticking and running.
Exactly what you told me.
You see, but he trained me. The inspiration was from him. He loved shorebirds. He loved gulls. He loved all birds and knew so much about every single species. And he loved hawk watching as well. It rubbed off on me, I think. But I do have to say that Ron got my interest. And then you just fall in love with them. They're so interesting. Their plumages, their phenomenal migrations, the intricacies of their plumage. And again, it's a challenge. There's a very good challenge on right now did you see about the Western sandpiper?
Oh, yes.
Yes, the whole point is that that's a juvenile bird. Western sandpipers molt, and that bird looks like where you can see the red scapulars. It's still in full juvenile plumage or very close to it. There are probably very few juvenile Western sandpipers around now because they will all have molted. So that's one of the clues that maybe it isn't a Western sandpiper to be so obviously in juvenile plumage. Yeah, so you just go from there. And under Ron's guidance, he has so many resource books and beautiful things. And it makes it all very interesting when you get into the life histories of the bird. And of course, their plumages, because that's so relevant every single day when we're out. Look at the birds, study it.
And that's probably one of the most important lessons I learned, and I'm glad I learned it only 11 days into birding. It certainly does help.
Right.
I am probably a bit observation blind when it comes to the alternate plumages of a lot of gulls, especially, and some shorebirds. I spent a lot of time in Florida on the beaches of Fort DeSoto, and where you would have 10 different shorebirds, and okay, is that a Wilson's plover? And after a while you realize that sort of plain light brown beige bird, that looks a lot different than all the other ones, and that might be my Wilson's plover. So paying attention to just colors and sizes and things like that.
Yeah. It sharpens your observation skills, especially when they're all in winter plumage. They're all the same color down there.
Yes.
So you've got to look, what's the bill like? What size?
All my shorebirds and even some warblers like yellow rumps in Florida in February, long before I ever saw them here. And
Right.
I didn't recognize some of the birds in spring migration the first time I ever saw them. I know people in Florida, they come to Canada in the spring or summer, and they're like, is there any way I can learn about these breeding plumages? Do you have any expertise?
Yeah. The ones that strike me because they're so different, like chestnut-sided warbler. When you first see it during our winter time in another place, you say, what the heck is that? Yeah, anyway, but that's how it all started. And of course, I guess it's within me too. You have to have a desire to write articles, an inspiration. I still want to write, and I still want to do presentations. And again, Ron was a teacher, and the inspiration for it, maybe that is the teacher in me too. And I still look at eBird again as an opportunity, just in the comments with a rare bird, to just expand a little tiny bit because maybe it'll rub off. We've got the Hudsonian godwit out in Durham, and it's a beautiful study bird. You can just stand there and see it. And I'm flabbergasted when people can come along and just put continuing in their eBird report. Somebody did it, and I just say, I'm so sorry I wasn't there when they were there. There were two people, just to encourage you to look at it a little more. And then in the writing, it makes you think about what you've seen, because you have to have noticed a few field marks. It's really good for birders just to do that as a matter of habit. So anyway,
especially with the rare ones.
Yes, yeah.
Anytime it's a rare bird and something that you will hope to see again and be able to identify, that's where making notes about it is most important. And that's what's great about eBird, because if you're doing eBird, you're having to make notes and justify it and explain what it is. In 2022, I had a bird out in Newfoundland that was rare for that time of year, and I stayed on it with my scope as long as I could, and I just kept making mental notes. And then when I had to do my eBird report, I had that all in my head and I could explain everything that I saw.
And noticing the details, starting young doing that, or early in your birding career, as it were, it makes you a better birder. And the best birders are those who are going out and they're automatically noticing all these points. Anyway, there we are. That's plumage and all that.
And you are an expert in a few specific shorebirds.
Willets? No,
willets, yes, the willet.
Yeah.
In the spring at Pelee,
people gather around you to give them the descriptions of the willets, and do we have a western willet, do we have an eastern willet, and how does that become very important to you?
Oh, again, all this, I'm not sure I would have, maybe I would have eventually stumbled all this, but Ron knew all this. He knew all these interesting but obvious things about the willets in May at Point Pelee are western and the end of April. They are western willets, and they are migrating from the east coast and south across to nest west of us on the prairies. So the eastern willets stay on the coast. They're Atlantic coast nesters. That's where they live and that's where they are. They also start breeding much earlier, but so the western willets that's where they're heading. And so we're unlikely the difference there are obvious differences in the plumage, but you automatically assume that the birds that we're seeing, and unless you see one that's very so that's it. It's the same with the marble godwits. Those marble godwits they've wintered on the southern east coast of the U.S. and down, and they are going across to breed on the prairies. Now they're migrating the end of April, early May. The James Bay subspecies or subpopulation of marble godwit, they winter in Mexico. And the very interesting thing about those birds is because they're breeding around James Bay, and James Bay in May, when you fly up there on the long May weekend, James Bay is still almost totally frozen over, or it used to be. And same with Hudson Bay. Even though the land has warmed up a little bit, it's still pretty cold, much colder than the prairies are at the same time. The James Bay birds don't return from Mexico until just after the May long weekend. That's when and we know all this from satellite tracking.
How has satellite tracking and some of the more modern methods changed how we understand migration?
I'm not a super expert in this, but with way better satellite tracking and with the MODIS tracking, everything can be more precise. The instruments they're using are probably lighter and better. With MODIS now, they can make them really small. They can be put on smaller birds. Back where in 2000, and I think it was when I assisted some U.S. researchers when they were putting the satellite transmitters on the birds on Agamsky Island, I don't know if they still do, but we were only putting them on females because they are larger and heavier and could take the weight of the transmitters. But I'm sure that what they use with MODIS, look at the incredible information we're getting with MODIS. That is brilliant.
Excuse me for a moment. I'm just going to step in here from the future and explain what the MODIS wildlife tracking system is that Jean was just talking about. It is an international collaborative research network that uses coordinated, automated radio telemetry to facilitate research and education of the ecology and conservation of migratory animals. I'm reading that from the modis.org website, which you can learn more about. MODIS is a program of Birds Canada in partnership with collaborating researchers and organizations. Go to motus.org, MOTUS, to learn more. Now back to our regularly scheduled program.
And is that help track changes in migration due to climate change?
You would have to ask someone like Stu McKenzie, and I'm sure that combined with eBird and sightings, they can tell whether birds are migrating south earlier.
From your own point of view, between the late 90s and now, have you noticed any patterns in migration change?
Honestly, it's hard. We tend to go to places where they're hot spots, and so you're always seeing a lot of birds. I know people say, oh, back in the 1990s or even earlier, Point Pelee, there were so many more birds coming through. And it's possible nowadays you go in May and you may have a few days, really good days of fallout. What's that an indication of? It's an indication that there are fewer days of crappy weather that bring the birds down.
Right.
We know the numbers have gone down. There's no question about that. I personally don't know about timings and because I haven't kept track of it myself.
So once you got into birding seriously, were you always a chaser, or when did you start going after every rare bird that you could?
Oh, that was Dave Milsom and Jim Coey. And so it was all about your list and life list, which and Roy Baker was another person who was very much, and he was an international birder. His international list was huge. He went all over the world. So that part of it, the challenge, if you like, came from them. Ron, I guess in his earlier days, he was a chaser and a lister as well, and he loved to see rare birds, but he wouldn't necessarily just, I want it, I've got to see it. That wasn't his, but he was always excited when I said, okay, come on, we're going. All right. And he would love to see it. But then he would want to spend all kinds of time looking at it, analyzing it, thinking about it. It wasn't just, okay, we've seen it. 1 minute, all right, we're off again for the next one. So he'd want to study every feather on it and then put it in a context and what have you. So, yeah. So I do love that part of it and I enjoy that, but I'm not going to, rock wren.
Yes, I was just going to ask you about that. How far will you go for an Ontario lifer?
I'm not sure. The rock wren, one of the very first birds I ever saw was down at Colonel Sam. I think it was Colonel Sam. There was a rock wren there. That was right when I was starting birding. And of course, I got to see the one in Eastern Ontario in the barn that was caught by a cat.
Before
I
it
did
was
see that
eaten.
one. So it's not a lifer for me.
Now you were out west this year. Did you get far enough to see rock wren?
I don't think, did we see? Oh, what did we see? Yeah, we may have seen one this year. I think we did in Alberta. What
So,
was the one? I've got a photo of, oh, maybe I'll have to look. Yes, we have something. I
so
don't even
that
remember.
is so going up to Thunder Bay for a bird that's not a Ontario lifer and not even possibly a year bird, you probably not.
Oh, I wouldn't do that. No.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't undertake a big year either. Just that's if the bird is within reasonable travel distance and it's of interest to me, then I will definitely go for it. And for example, the black-tailed gull is a good example. I couldn't wait to get in my car and go and see that bird.
Yes.
If it's found to be in a regular location, I would love to go again just so that I can study it and spend a little bit of time looking at it.
Well, that's the one thing more from in 2012, just chasing every single bird in North America to wanting to, once that was over, see birds in their nesting grounds and their natural habitats.
Right.
You get birds that are not necessarily native to a specific area, and it's great to go chase them. But then I want to go and find where they nest and see not just one, but the many and see their nesting behaviors. Speaking of nesting behaviors, I had no idea of Bonaparte's gulls and the way they nested and so I'm walking under a tree not expecting there to be a gull nesting in it, and of course they are extremely territorial and protective of their nests. So I walk under this tree. I was skirting the water area where I assumed they were, and the bird flew right out of the tree and chased me away and was just dive bombing me. It was just incredible. I didn't expect that they'd be that territorial, and if I had known they were in trees, I would have stayed closer to the water and further from the trees.
Right. Where was that?
That was in the Yukon.
Okay.
And that was one of the things that I was excited about in 2022 was to travel to a lot of these places in the summer so I could see the nesting grounds of a lot of birds. And That was a lot of fun, but I do want to get to James Bay. I've never been.
It's not easy.
I've heard that.
There are no roads in the summer. Yeah.
No.
You go to Moosonee or you can go to Attawapascat, but from there you're on your own. So you need a helicopter or
I'm not
you
going to
need
do
to
that.
sleep, or you need to have a contact among the Moose Cree and they'll take you out in a boat to the mouth of the Moose River. But to get up to the coast, up the coast, you have to have a helicopter.
Okay.
There's no other way of getting in.
I guess I won't be doing that. I do want to get.
I don't know.
Maybe I'll just do Hudson's Bay.
Yeah, that's why some of the communities up on the coast. Or the thing is, you volunteer for atlasing. The only thing is, it sounds some of them who've got the contacts can get a helicopter to do their surveys, but the others who are into going into the north are canoeing and doing it that camping and canoeing, and it's wonderful and everything, but certainly you have to be in good shape to be doing that. Have good outdoor skills.
How many trips to James Bay have you taken over the years?
Oh my goodness. From my James Bay proper, my first time was in 2005 with Ken Abraham. And then 2006 was Agamski Island. 2008 was Agamski again. And then the James Bay project was every summer from 2009 to 2018 or 19, something like that. So 11, 12, 13, 14 years, 13 or 14 years.
And have there been species up there that you've seen that you've never seen anywhere else?
Have I seen guillemot anywhere else? But we got black guillemot up there. I don't think I've seen that in southern Ontario. That may be the only one. But for you, if you want to go up, and you still need a helicopter to get you up the coast. Some of those guys are going and they're renting the cabin at Netatishi Point, but you still need a helicopter to fly you in. And then I don't know, they're getting Fulmar and other things if you go at the right time of year. Late September, I guess.
So I wonder if the best way to get up there is to volunteer to do atlasing.
Will get you up there surveying in the summer. There's only one more year left of that. Otherwise, if you going out to the mouth of the Moose River is fantastic, and to Shipsands Island. So I can give you the name of one of the Cree. He takes the OFO group, I believe, and then other than that, you book a helicopter and go out and rent. You rent the cabin from the Cree owners, and you get out that way. But yeah, so it's utterly amazing experience up there. And Hudson Bay, my first trip, again with Ken Abraham, was in 2002, and that was to go to do goose banding and to do surveying as well. So that was my very first trip, and all that came around about because I was the OFO rep on the Ontario Shorebird Conservation Plan. And so we would have all these meetings, and everybody was they would be talking about Hudson Bay and James Bay. And finally, I said to Ken, who is also on the committee, that's how I met him. And I said, now, how would I not knowing, how would I ever get up to Hudson Bay? How does one get up there? And he said, oh, you want to go? And I said, yes. He said, I'll take you.
There you go.
So there we go. So I was on their banding crew and loved that. And I did that for a couple of years. And at the same time, you get to see all the shorebirds and everything else along the coast. You get to see polar bears, loads of polar bears. And Agamski Island, of course, is the best place to experience polar bears.
Wow. I've seen the grizzly bears and the brown bears up north in Alaska, but I had not seen a polar bear.
Oh my God. Your best bet is to go to Churchill I'm not sure what time of year, maybe it's around now. But it's before they go back out on the ice. And on the Hudson Bay coast, you don't really want to meet up with them, because you're on your own. You have to be walking around everywhere with a gun. And so, yes, we have many polar bear stories. But actually, we were surrounded by the Monogamsky Island. They just came and sat at the gate of our camp or just outside, and they just watched us. They just sniffed the air and watched us. And our attitude was, unless they're misbehaving and doing something, we don't bother them and they don't bother us. We had mothers and one cub, mother with two cubs, couple of mothers with two cubs, one mother with three cubs, and they would just wander by our camp and go back and forth along the coast. And again, a mother with cubs like that, we didn't want to be banging and scaring them. And we were doing shorebird research, but our attitude was, we're in their habitat. This is their home in the summertime. And so the least amount of disturbance for them. And I think we did the right ethical. It meant that we had to change a lot of things about the research that was going on in terms of we couldn't leave the camp for 5 kilometers, which was the original. You have an area that you're surveying and you have to survey it regular intervals. There's no way you can walk 5 kilometers and then think that you're going, if you meet a polar bear at kilometer 5 who is not nice, you're going to get back to camp safely. So we had to do everything within a very close distance of the camp. And again, trying not to have any encounters with the bears.
Yeah, when I was in Alaska with a guide. I think we were looking for a three-toed woodpecker, and what I thought at the time was a huge bear started walking by, and before I saw it, the guide said, "We're getting back in the car right now." And it's like, okay, and we got in the car and closed the doors, and then he showed me why we were getting in the car, and I thought, wow, that is huge. I'd never seen one before. And he said, that's just the baby. That's not why we're getting in the car. We're getting in the car because the parent is probably close behind, and if we're anywhere near that baby, we're not going to survive. So that was one of my scariest moments, even though I didn't realize I had to be scared until after. What was one of the more scary moments you've had in the north with the bears? What was probably the one time you thought, I'm glad I got out of that one?
Oh, actually, I know Ken doesn't like me. No, actually, you go through very extensive bear training. Over the years, I've taken the bear safety course many times. But actually, one of them was on our first trip, and we have a helicopter, we have a pilot, we have people who have guns, and we've had all the training. And before you land, the chopper always does a sweep around the air. So we were banding geese, and so you make sure there's no polar bear within sight. When you decide, okay, we're going here, and there's no polar bear in sight, you got to set up nets. It takes a little bit, and you also have to, you generally try to be able to have a good radius of, so be able to see 360. But anyway, so we're all set up. We caught all these geese there in the pen, and we're sitting down banding the geese. The chopper pilot was outside the net, so we're in the nets doing it. Then the chopper pilot, and then the helicopter was there too. And then our heads are all down because you're looking at what you're doing, putting the band on. And then all of a sudden, the pilots, he was outside. So what you do, when you put a band on, you would tell him the band number. He was really lovely guy, and he was doing the recording for us so that all of us could be doing the so and all of a sudden he said, holy shit, polar bear. We all looked up, and then right behind him, was a bear. And he said, how did that bear get here? And nobody, we didn't see it.
White on white?
Anyway, oh my God, we're on these little stools. So Ken and the whole group said, just jump up and down, scare it, throw the chairs. So we threw you just got to get it to go, and the bear's just looking at us. Oh, this is really fun. Anyway, between jumping up and down and shouting and throwing the chairs at it, it turned around. And of course, because it was between the pilot and the helicopter, because the minute you start the blades going, it scared it away. Anyway, it went far enough that he was then able to start it up, and you scare it off that way. So that was really, it was a scary moment, but it just shows you how much ground they cover in a short space of time. They just lumber over the land. Then there was another really interesting incident. There were only ever, what, 6 of us at the camp or whatever. The helicopter can only hold, how many people is it? 1, 2, 3, maybe it's 4. 3 in the front and one in the front and maybe 3 in the back. But anyway, so this was the next year at the camp. And Andrew Jano, who's passed away since now, but he was up there and with me. So the helicopter pilot said, oh, he could only take, I think there were 6 of us. And so he could take 4 out and then come back and pick up the other 2. So anyway, I was with Andrew. What they have along the coast are the places where they've got fuel for the helicopter, and so they've got to come in and refuel. It's called a fuel cache. So he dropped the other 4 at the fuel cache, and then he said to us, he said, there's no point in me putting you there he was there, the Cree have their own hunt camp on the coast. He said, I'm going to drop you over at this camp. He said, because they have an electric fence around it. It won't be in operation now, but you can go inside. If a bear comes along, you can go inside and turn on the fence. All the camps have. And so he dropped me and Andrew there all by us. Anyway, of course, what do you know? A bear, we could see, oh my God, there's a bear coming at us. Anyway, first of all, do you think we could get the fence going? No, the fence. We could not get the fence. We are saying, get back over here, pick us up, because there's a bear coming at us. That was a little scary, but anyway, there are enough bears though.
So this might be just a little trauma there.
Oh, there is, but you just hope you get saved.
What about moose encounters on those northern roads?
Oh, no, not many. There are caribou, loads of caribou, like big herd of caribou. We had those. The herd of caribou kept us in the camp a couple of times, and that is absolutely magnificent.
Oh,
see them. Oh,
I saw
my
that
God.
saw that in the Yukon in the Northwest Territories, where you just stop, get out of your car, and just watch them cross the roads, and it's just a phenomenal experience. Anyone who hasn't had a chance to do that's just one of the wonders of going up north is to see the caribou.
Yeah, there was one of the camps on James Bay. Mostly it was black bears that we had to deal with because they get into the cabin and then they eat your food, which is what they did on our first trip, because we couldn't close the cabin that had all our kitchen cabin. The door was like a bar door, it swung back and forth, so you couldn't, when you got outside, you couldn't close it because you just lean on it and it opened up that way. And so a bear did get in and eat most of our food that was out, and then we had to actually call in and get a helicopter to drop us off food. But we learned from that, and then we put up an electric fence around the food cabin every time from then on. You had to do it, yeah.
But most of your birding is in southern Ontario nowadays, I'm assuming. What are your favorite spots at different times of year that you have to be?
Oh, Point Pelee, of course, in spring. And I like it when the OFO convention is down there. The other favorites I really like when the Pacific loons are about. Certainly Durham. I spend most of my local birding time in Durham just because logistically I'm less than 20 minutes from the Durham border, and the marsh, the Durham coastal marsh or the lakeshore marshes there are fantastic. I like those. Spring and fall, particularly fall, is really good. Hawk watching, really enjoy it at Cranberry Marsh. And I like to take a trip to Long Point at some point during the year. Presqu'île, of course, and Algonquin in the winter, the usual.
Having lived in Toronto for most of my life, And once I started birding, Durham was a reasonably easy trip to go to, and Cranberry Marsh, I go several times. Now I'm in Brantford and thinking, I don't want to go all the way across the GTA.
Yes.
It has to be something really special to go all the way out there now. But on the other hand, Brantford is the home of the rare gulls. And
yes. No, I know.
we had that California gull, and I literally live 5 minutes from that spot over and over again, and didn't see it. And you were there the one day, and you had it in your scope, and we all ran over to where you were, and a dog walker was down there.
Oh my God, that's right.
And
I remember
10 seconds before I got there, the dog walker flushed all the birds off the water, and I never saw that California gull.
Actually, talking about things that have changed, you see, now in the Niagara River, again, you want to know favorite. Of course, that's one of my absolute favorites. And we used to spend, certainly when I was working, or even when Ron was working and he only could come down on the weekends, we would spend just about every weekend at Niagara from sometime in November all the way into January.
Mhm.
Now, the Niagara River, so back then, probably up until, I don't know, maybe only, I don't know how many years ago, suddenly we realized that there are actually lots more gulls like Brantford, where there's a dump. We got fabulous views of Iceland gulls. They come right into the parking lot at Bluffers Park, and you can have spot on views of them. You know what I mean? Say, hi today.
Right.
How are you today? And so we can look at gulls at a much closer distance, right at other locations. And I think and up at Barrie, that's another super fantastic spot for gulls.
One of my favorite post Peely trips was to go to the Huron Fringe Birding Festival last year, and found out why they call it Peely North.
I do the Huron Fringe Birding Festival every year. I lead trips there. I love going. One of the lines, I don't know, you probably heard about it, called the J.I. line. And it's a grassland, farmland habitat all along the road. It's absolutely delightful. So I really enjoy that. And yeah, and of course, Niagara, along with Ron Toza and Ron Pittaway early on, but then it was me and Ron primarily, just the two of us, or Ron and I. Niagara River is still a very special place, and I do the IBA count. So that's a 3-part count. We do it 3 times, November, December, and January, just so that you can get the difference in the numbers of gulls and ducks and everything between the 3 months. So I do that with Willie Deanna and Riley Walsh. And we've been doing that now for quite a number of years. Again, it's important to document. This is a super important area for many species. So I definitely keep up, but I love doing it. I want to keep up with all my knowledge about the Niagara River and love going down there. Again, the spectacular scenery, the concentrations of birds is phenomenal.
Well, I know the first weekend in December is the start of winter listing, and it's always very busy there with birders, and there's usually an OFO trip.
I'm not doing it anymore. I did retire from it. So you have to leave these things that you've been doing for, well, I don't know, 20 years or whatever, because you have to pass it on so that there's succession.
Yes, and there's so many good youth birders right now in Ontario. I met them all in 2022. So many of them that their knowledge base is incredible.
Yes.
Have you been a bit of a mentor to some of the younger birders?
Oh, I believe in it. Yes, I hope so. I feel it makes me happy. I like helping people, talking to people, and if I can help them or share my knowledge with them, I love doing it. And they ask me, and I'm very flattered that some of the young birders, they message me on Discord, or they send a message or somehow, and I enjoy chatting to them. I am so impressed with incredible knowledge for such a young age. And again, because I was a teacher and into I actually part of my job for many years was assessments, individual intellectual assessments and all that. So I'm always fascinated that what is it that makes a young bird love birds and learn so quickly and know so much at such a young age. Anyway, no, it's very impressive.
Yes, it is. This year, you took a trip out west, and you say you're not a big year birder, but you're over 370 species this year, which is pretty good. And
I know that was. I'll tell you, I love doing things on the spur of the moment. If somebody were to call me today and say, "Hey, listen, there's such and such," there were all those European shorebirds in Newfoundland. I mean, my favorites, black-tailed godwit. I love those birds. Absolutely fabulous. And I, especially because of my connection to Wales, my family's there, and I go to visit every summer, and I see black-tailed godwits, huge flocks of them over summering. And I've, in fact, reported banded birds. I'm in contact with the researchers in Ireland. Those are Icelandic birds, so I've seen black-tailed godwits on the breeding grounds in Iceland, and I had to go. And it's the same if there's an approachable northern lapwing. That is one of my most wanted.
I had northern lapwing in 2012 in a cornfield in the fall, and that was one of the most exciting chases that I've done. To me, combining chasing rare birds with just birding on a regular basis makes it a bit of an adventure. Thank you so much for taking the time.
I can talk all day. It sounds like you can too. But good, there's so much to talk about. I've got the new gull book that's out here too. Here. Actually, I was lucky because Amar sent me complimentary. Oh, and this one too. Here. This is wonderful. Can you see it?
Oh, yes, the Stokes Guide.
The Stokes
vintage.
Guide. Matt Young sent me that, and it's got a beautiful note inside. He signed it, and Lillian signed it. And then they've got a lovely acknowledgement to Ron in the back, where they do their acknowledgements.
I met the Stokes in Florida in 2012, and I have one of their books on my shelf.
Yeah, so all these things. That's it.
One last thing. Recently, Sandy Comito passed away. Did you have any encounters with him at all over?
Oh, yes, over the years. But I know we knew him and he knew us. That's about it. So the guy who we know was the one, I don't know what was his name. He came up to Toronto. Anyway, he was doing a big year. That year was the SMU that was out at Whitby Harbour. Anyway.
Oh, I remember that because it was gone on January 1st when I got there.
Yes. I remember we met him at the airport, and I still remember taking the 407, going straight from the airport on the 407 to avoid, the traffic must have been really bad back then too, and getting out to Whitby, and of course it wasn't there. And I thought his name I thought his name...
Future me here once again, and I just wanted to let you know the birder that we were trying to remember the name of was John Vanderpool. He was one of my inspirations, reading about him in 2011 that inspired my big year in addition to the movie. He was the winner of the 2011 big year, and of course it was Jean who took him to see the SMU, and unfortunately he missed it. As did I when I went for it on January 1st. Anyway, back to the past.
I have the whole thing about him. I have a website. I don't do it anymore, but it's a wonderful diary of everything I did that was significant for almost 20, from 2003 on. Mm-hmm. So that's how many years. Then, 17 years I did that.
Well,
but yes, so that's my connection to the big year, guys.
Thank you again.
Anyway, thank you.
And I hope people will say hi to you, and when they see you now, and introduce themselves and ask you for birding advice and let you continue your education.
Thank you. All right. Okay, what's coming up here? Anything? Rock Wren continues. Oh my God. A little stick around. Yeah, it's popping up there. Are you going?
No, it's just a little too far. If it's on the weekend, I might go, and if there's nice weather, I'll do that. Oops, we got disconnected, but accidentally, probably my fault. But thank you again, and enjoy your day.
Well, thanks to Jean, it kind of ended on an abrupt note. I apologize for that, but she had to go anyway. But I think I enjoyed listening to this episode even more the second time around. I hope you enjoyed learning more about Jean and her birding adventures over the years. Like Jean, we all have our mentors and the people we can look back on and say, without them, I might not have become the birder I am now. For me, along with Sue, of course, Jean was that person. She made me stop and really appreciate that king eider. And an adult male king eider really is a bird to appreciate. It's actually been nearly 10 years since I've seen an adult male. Thinking back to the movie The Big Year, I didn't realize it until later that the king eider was the bird that Brad, played by Jack Black in the movie The Big Year, had posted on his workstation. Noticing and appreciating small details makes all the difference. Speaking of which, before I go, I'd like to ask you to please check out my new book, Have You Seen a Seagull? It's a great book to read with your kids and perhaps spark their journey into birding. As of this recording, it's only available on Apple Books, but it will be available on other digital platforms soon and hopefully in print before too long. Half of all digital sales will go to bird conservation efforts, so if not for me, get it for the birds and for the next generation of birders. Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Jean Iron, and I hope you'll look forward to hearing me next time. Until then, get out there, see some birds, and enjoy all that spring migration has to offer. I'm Robert Bomander, and what? I'm Robert Poinder and what? That's how my brain works, you see. I don't know anything about what I am, but let's try it again. Hello, Big Year Podcast is back. I'm Robert Bomander, and you're not. Using a spice jar lid with her camera to something about using a spice rack with my obligatory. Being an Ontario birder, there's no better. It is an international collaborative research network that uses coordinated automated radio telemetry to facilitate research and education of the ecology and conservation of migratory animals. That's some big words. In partnership with collaborating